I better tell you something about myself before I start, because I'm actually an expert in nothing. That may sound flippant, but in many ways it's true. I was a senior civil servant in Whitehall for 33 years, which means that you're a jack of all trades. And I worked in government departments. I worked in NATO for 5 years in Brussels. And then I retired in 2003, or so I thought. 3 months later, I was invited to apply for a clerkship in the House of Lords. Now, clerk does not mean filing clerk. It means someone who organises programmes for select committees, writes reports, and so on and so forth. And I thought, well, I wasn't doing anything, so I'll do it. And I walked straight into a select committee inquiring into something called assisted dying. My first question was, what's assisted dying? I'd never heard of it. I didn't know what I thought of it. It sounded like a lot of work, and I've always been very keen to avoid work. But haven't we all? So anyhow, I decided to do it. It was 6 months, very heavy work, but fascinating work. I soon learned what assisted dying was. The committee went to Oregon, Switzerland, the Netherlands. It received 15,000 letters from members of the public. I read every single one of them. And then we had to draft the report. The committee was deadlocked. And so all the report did was to summarise the evidence on one side or the other. By the end of the session, I'd begun to have serious doubts about whether assisted dying should be legalised. But it was none of my business. I was the functionary, as they say. I then went off to do other things. And in 2008, I retired for the second time. Or so I thought. Because 2 years later, I was approached by Baroness Laura Finlay, who had been on the committee, and Lord Alex Carlisle, QC, one of Britain's leading lawyers, who'd also been on the committee, and they said to me, we are tired of all the mudslinging that goes on between the opponents and proponents of assisted dying. We want to set up a think tank to be called Living and Dying Well. Would you run it? Okay, I'll run it. I've been there for 7 years, and I don't seem to be able to get away. Anyway, tonight I'm not going to waste any more time. It is a think tank. It has a position on this subject. That is that based on the evidence, we do not think it is safe to legalise assisted dying. But it's not an absolutist position, and we do believe very strongly that there are respectable arguments on both sides, and that both the proponents and opponents equally deserve respect. And I think that is actually very important. So I want to just take you through it's not a thorough analysis of David Seymour's, but it's a preliminary analysis. We haven't had time to do detailed work on it. It's a preliminary analysis of the provisions of David Seymour's end-of-life choice bill. There are a lot of euphemisms in this debate. There is only one bill that has actually given the label on the tin to match the contents. That is the Dutch euthanasia bill. Do you know what that's called? It's called the Termination of Life on Request and Assisted Suicide Bill. You've got to admire the Dutch for their frankness. Mr. Seymour's bill, what would it legalise? And I'm quoting from the bill here. The administration by a medical practitioner of a lethal dose of medication to a person to relieve his or her suffering by hastening death. In other words, a doctor injects you with lethal drugs. But there is apparently a choice between a doctor injecting you and supplying you with lethal drugs to take yourself. What the bill would legalise is what is known in the trade as physician-assisted euthanasia, that's where a doctor injects you, PAE, or physician-assisted suicide, PAS, where a doctor supplies you with drugs, take home and take yourself. What are the criteria? Who would actually be eligible for this? There are medical criteria, first of all. Someone who has a terminal illness and has been given a prognosis of 6 months or less, that's the same as Oregon. Or someone who has a grievous and irremediable medical condition, which is very much wider, and is in an advanced state of irreversible decline and capacity. And there are other criteria. Someone who experiences unbearable suffering that cannot be relieved in a manner that he or she considers tolerable, and has the ability to understand, one, the nature of assisted dying, and two, the consequences for him or her of assisted dying. Now, let's take the first one. How easy is it to say someone is likely to die within 6 months? The select committee that I've referred to received evidence from experts on this. The Royal College of General Practitioners in the UK said, "It is possible to make reasonably accurate prognoses of death within minutes, hours, or a few days. When this stretches to months, then the scope for error can extend into years." The Royal College of Physicians said, "Prognosticating may be better when they're within the last 2 or 3 weeks of their life. When they are 6 or 8 months away, it's actually pretty desperately hopeless as an accurate factor." Oregon itself shows this. People are given lethal drugs to take home on the basis that they have 6 months or less to live. They don't immediately take them, which is marvellous. They don't feel it necessary, but some of them live for 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, in some cases up to 3 years. Prognosticating death is not an exact science. What exactly is a grievous and irremediable condition? Well, we know what an irremediable condition is. It's an incurable condition. But what is a grievous condition? We don't know. We're not told that. It's a potentially large group of people. Multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, heart disease, insulin-dependent diabetes. The list goes on. There could scarcely be a street in New Zealand where there isn't somebody with a condition like that. If you are doing this for people who have not been given a terminal prognosis, are you really assisting dying if they're not dying already? What exactly is meant by declining capability? What about people who are terminally ill but whose capability is not affected? Conversely, what about people who have capability problems but are not terminally or seriously ill? Is this about illness or is it about capability? Unbearable suffering in a manner that he or she considers tolerable. How can a subjective criterion be regarded as a safeguard? The essence of a safeguard is that it has to be objective. Otherwise, you can just override it by saying, "I don't agree," so it's not a safeguard. And what kind of suffering are we talking about? Normally, when the case for assisted dying is presented, people tend to think, we're talking about people who are suffering agonizing pain. Not the case. Are we looking at physiological suffering, psychological suffering, existential suffering? In Oregon, if you look at the reasons people give why they apply for lethal drugs, pain comes well down the list, very low down. The top reason is can't enjoy life as I used to. I want autonomy to end my life when I want to end it. I want dignity when I die. All these are perfectly understandable reasons, and I'm not criticizing them as reasons. But are they what most of us think of as suffering in this particular context? Mental competence. The bill sets a very low bar here. You simply have to understand what assisted dying is and what the consequences are. It's not a very difficult test, is it? Mental competence is, first of all, you have to establish whether somebody's compos mentis. Are their thinking processes working normally? Can they think about information? Can they retain information? And if they can, there's a second element, impaired judgment. You may be able to manage information, but can you use it? I can think of many times in my life when I've been perfectly compos mentis, but I would say my judgment has been impaired. And what impairs judgment? Well, a range of things. Depression is one, domestic circumstances, societal expectations. Oregon's experience of this. A small-scale study was done some years ago of people who had applied for physician-assisted suicide. They were followed through. It was done by psychiatrists, and they found at the end that of 18 people who had been cleared for assisted suicide, 3 had actually had clinical depression, which had not been diagnosed, and all 3 had gone on to take their own lives. There is a proposal called SCENS. SCEN is a system in the Netherlands. It's a group of doctors who specialise in assessing people for euthanasia. This is SCEN NZ, as it's called. And basically, if your doctor won't do it, there's a panel of doctors who will do it for you. They will assess you. Now, it recognises the reluctance of doctors to do this. Most doctors simply won't touch this. But the problem is that if you are referred to a doctor who is not your regular doctor, that doctor knows nothing about you at all. You've simply got the case notes to go on. And this has been the practice in Oregon. There's something called doctor shopping, which has grown up. Most people who take their own lives in Oregon have been assessed by doctors who've never met them before. And then the post-approval period. You have your approval for euthanasia or assisted suicide. You don't have to implement it straight away. That's marvellous. You can call in 6 months later and say, right, okay, I want the drugs, or I want you to inject me with the drugs. But who knows what's happened in the meantime? Have you lost capacity? It's not uncommon in serious illness. Is anyone putting pressure on you? You may not have been under pressure when you got the approval, but have you come under pressure since then? Who knows? There is a review committee, which actually is to be commended because there isn't one in Oregon. There is a review committee on which there's no lawyer, a couple of doctors and an ethicist, that's meant to look at the cases where approval has been given and to check whether they're within the law. This is modelled on the Netherlands. The trouble is, with the Netherlands review committees are extremely light touch. They have cleared, since the law was changed, 99.6% of all the cases put to. Now, no law is ever obeyed to that extent. And if you read the reports that come out, they contain some pretty hair-raising examples. Like, for example, of the 3 young women who were given euthanasia. Why? They were suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder because they'd been sexually abused as children. There are other examples too. I read one where a man who had suffered from aphasia. He couldn't speak. He'd lost the capacity to speak. But he discussed euthanasia with his doctor beforehand. And when he indicated that he wanted it, the doctor reassessed him, and he couldn't answer the questions, but the doctor thought, well, he's discussed it with me before, so he must want euthanasia. Are these review committees self-selecting? Would you serve on one if you had reservations about euthanasia? Are the people who serve on them likely to be people who see taking your own life as a rational response to serious illness? This is not to impugn their integrity. They may well be perfectly honest people, but it raises a question. And what about doctors? Should assisted dying really be part of clinical practice? There is something called the do no harm principle in medicine. First, do no harm. An essential part of the Hippocratic Oath. Many of the criteria that are involved are not medical at all. They're social. Are you under pressure? Do you have the capacity to do this? Are you liable to mood swings? These are not medical criteria. Are doctors able to assess them? Most doctors won't do it, and as we've said, you get doctor shopping. Is this not a role for the courts? Is it not the courts who make decisions on social issues of this nature? Should doctors not be expert witnesses rather than judges in cases like this? It raises some very serious questions. But this bill is embedded in clinical practice, as other ones are throughout the world. What's the overview? And I'm going to finish now. It's a very widely drawn bill. I'm surprised at that, because it's jumped in at the deep end. It's right at one end of the spectrum. It covers terminal and chronic illness. It's likely to lead to a high annual death rate. Let me give you some statistics here. These are the calculations we've done. If you had a physician-assisted suicide law for terminally ill people only with less than 6 months to live, in other words, Oregon's model, you'd be looking at about 120 assisted suicide deaths in New Zealand in a year. That's based on Oregon's current but rising death rate. If you had a law along the lines that's being proposed, you'd be looking not at 120, but at about 1,250 euthanasia deaths in New Zealand every year. And Oregon's numbers, in the numbers in the Netherlands are still rising steeply. In the Netherlands, last year, 1 death in every 26 was the result of euthanasia. The bill in front of you is strong on form filling, but its safeguards are ill-defined. Its safeguards are not safeguards at all. They are idealistic concepts, but there is no minimum requirements that a doctor would have to do in order to establish whether they've been fulfilled. And the bill rests on questionable assumptions. In the explanatory note, we're told the motivation for this bill is compassion. I don't doubt it. I have no problem with the intentions of those who want to change the law, but compassion is one thing, reality is another. And compassion for whom? Are we thinking about compassion for a small number of people who are very strong-minded and have no doubts at all that they want to end their lives? Or are we thinking about compassion for larger numbers of people whose situations are difficult, who are ambivalent, who are vulnerable, who don't know whether they want to die or not? Compassion for whom? Now, you know, it's not for me to come from the UK and tell you what to do with this sort of bill. New Zealand is a sovereign nation. It must decide what it wants to do. But the sort of experience we've had in researching what's happened elsewhere is something which you might want to take into account.